Sure. All right. So we welcome today Mr. James Chu. Mr. Chu is a Senior Global Group Director of Cadence Design Systems Incorporated, and also the Chairman in the National Defense Industry Association Science and Engineering Technology Division. So James, the stage is yours, and you have about 1 hour if you want to continue.
Okay, I almost promise you that this talk will not last 58 minutes. We'll leave some questions right there. So, I know that in the flyer that was sent out, it said 40 years. I talked about 40 years looking up, and of course, you notice in the description, I said I've been working for 37 years. So even though I am rapidly approaching my 6th decade of life, I'm not senile yet. So we'll hit on that a little later. So just so you know, Cal Poly Pomona does have a very special place in my heart. I started there as a junior transfer in 1980 and 1981. And I did manage to graduate early, believe it or not, in 1984. And Cal Poly Pomona has a special place in my heart because it really was sort of my last chance at trying to be an engineer. I was one of those hotshot high school seniors who thought he knew everything. Was doing cartwheels in the hallway when I got accepted to this place called UCLA to be an engineer. Immediately went in that meat grinder and got chewed out, spit out. And so I went back home and went to community college for a year to try to at least get my senses back. So during that time, the professor at the time who was teaching at Valley College mentioned, I was talking about applying for schools again. He mentioned this place called Cal Poly Pomona. And I looked into it and I said, well, why not? So I did it. And I actually had some very interesting experiences there. And I'll think a little later when I talk, you'll see what type of impression that school has made to me. So that's one thing. One of the impressions it made is that in 2009, I was honored by Cal Poly Pomona as your College of Engineering Distinguished Alumnus. That was quite the surprise. I was pleased to hear that. And then in 2019, Dr. Angela Shee, who was the previous Mechanical Engineering Department Chair, nominated me for your Engineering Hall of Fame. I didn't know you had one, but it's nice to know about that. And I wasn't selected. And frankly, after this talk, you'll probably figure out why. But anyway, so when I received the phone call to talk about in the email to be a professor of the day, and I said, well, okay, what are these about? And when I was sent the class descriptions, I have to admit, I did get A's in both those classes. I checked. I did get A's in both of them, but it's been a while since I've used this knowledge. And I didn't want to be held responsible for any student failing this class. So I said, well, what else can we talk about? And I said, well, why don't you talk about your experiences that are somewhat related to the classes as well as, mechanical engineering in general. And then they said, well, and then I was also told, have fun with it too. And I was going to do that until I was also told that I'm not allowed to drink while I'm talking. So we're just going to have to do the best that we can. So just so you know, this is a treat for me. It's I annually try to come out to the campus to talk to the mechanical engineering clubs. I've been successful until frankly last year. And then the previous dean of engineering used to make annual trips out to Washington, D.C. and I would then meet him for lunch. And it was always a nice time. And every time at the end, both the previous dean and the previous mechanical engineering department chair would ask, would I consider being a commencement speaker? And I said, well, gosh, you've got to be able to find somebody more qualified than me. Frankly, I thought they were just being polite until a couple of years ago when I said, I really wouldn't mind doing this. And I found out they really were just being polite, but that's okay. But, like any good engineer, I prepared for it. So I wrote the darn thing. So, I suffered for this work. So now it's your turn. So I wrote it and you get to hear it. So we'll see how you guys like it. So let's talk about, for all you students there, let's talk about the purpose of education. Because I think people tend to ask, it's always good to have a little bit of perspective, sit back and why are you here? So if you really think about it, in this country, it's very unique, our education system. From kindergarten to high school, you're supposed to be able to receive all the basic skills to allow you to become a productive member of society. I am still one of those people to this day that say, College isn't for everybody, and frankly, everybody shouldn't go to college. I have a lot of friends who have learned a trade and they become entrepreneurs. I've always said, and especially after I was extremely humbled during my welding classes at Cal Poly Pomona, if you're a great welder, go make a living now, because you will always have a living. If you're great in terms of in terms of metal shop and stuff like that. But that being said, if you decide to go to college, especially in engineering, you notice that in your undergraduate, it's divided into two sections, lower division and upper division. Now, lower division teaches you some new tools, your engineering mechanics, your statics, dynamics, and things, vibrations, and things like that. Upper division, especially at Cal Poly Pomona, you're starting to be trained to think. These are some pretty unique skills that you have. And one thing that you find out with these skills, life is not a plus x, 4 plus x equals 5. What is x? That's not life. It's really what I call a bunch of story problems. It's something that everybody hates to do, but frankly, that's what life is about. If you're going to be an engineer, you're going to have to deal with story problems. If you decide to go to graduate school, and I certainly hope you guys do, make sure your company pays for it, by the way, if you do that, you get advanced training and thinking in a specialized field. So it's all about making yourself more productive about into life. And frankly, at the end of each stage, you're prepared to go make a difference. And my experience, frankly, has shown that not everybody has them to go make a difference, but the difference can be made by anybody. Now, I was joking with Dr. G about this wonderful Taj Mahal that is now the engineering building at Cal Poly Pomona. I'll talk about what it looked like when I was there in a few minutes. But when you go to the larger name brand colleges and universities, they're strewn with positions and buildings and departments and schools named after notable and contributing alums. They're meant to serve as permanent reminders of the potential of earning a college education. But as I've seen in my graduate alma mater, USC, those things are only as permanent as the next notable and contributing alum. And today I vow to all of you that if I'm ever in a position to contribute significantly to Cal Poly Pomona, I will have a large named parking structure built in the middle of campus, because I don't think you guys will ever tear that one down. So that is my promise to you. So if you see me going down the hallways winning either the Super Lotto or Powerball, remind me of that, please. So, one thing I already talked about Cal Poly Pomona, and really think about it, it's not about name buildings, endowed chairs, athletic programs. Lord knows I was there when we cut our football program, thank God. You got tired of being on the losing end of, blowouts all the time, but it's not about that. Or it's really not about pursuing funding for cutting edge research. Cal Poly Pomona is special in that it's about learning, it's about doing. And if you think about how special Cal Poly Pomona is, think about this. For over 70 years, your campus and your colleagues put it on the line and put on display for the world. This is what we do. Hopefully you guys will know what I'm talking about. It's the Rose Float. For over 70 years, you guys have done that. MIT doesn't do that. Harvard doesn't do that. Georgia Tech doesn't do that. I could name all the list of the folks. The only reason why some of those schools attend is because their football teams make it. Remember, we don't have a football team, but every year you're there. Think about that. And you can display to your friends and family, this is what this does. Oh, by the way, I've noticed that just for chuckles, I did check. I think it's been over 30 years now that we've been on the U.S. News and World Report's Best Small Colleges. So that's something to be said about a school that, frankly, a lot of people never hear about. Nice thing about being an engineering major, if you don't already have a full-time job, and by the way, that's why I say 40 years versus 37 years. I was 3 years as a student engineer. You're going to have several competing job offers by the time you graduate. And you can contrast that to your liberal arts and your pure science counterparts, who will probably be back living with their parents after they graduate, complaining about that the internet's slow and how they can't pay their student loan payments on their Walmart, Starbucks, and McDonald's wages, but no need to rub that in their faces yet. Now, I talked a little bit about that Taj Mahal, that is the engineering department. When I was there, we weren't, the department wasn't quite a Quonset hut, but wasn't much better than that. It literally was a metal-sided building that you knew was that, thank God we weren't living in hurricane country, because that thing was going to get blown away at any minute. And by the way, when I was taking the courses that I've been honored to be the visiting professor for, it was called ME 312, taught by Professor Kuntz, and ME 405, taught by Dr. Biddle, who also was my senior project advisor. So frankly, I'm assuming adding a significant figure to these course classes must signify progress. That's what happens after 40 years, right? But when I think about Cal Poly Pomona, here's what I remember. I do remember Professor Kuntz, and I do remember Dr. Biddle, but I also remember Professor Engelke. I remember Dr. Sievers, Dr. Dashner, who I think still may be there, Dr. Dowell, Professor Noreen, Dr. Rathman, Professor Berkowitz, Professor Bildmore, Dr. Schneider, Dr. Zell, Dr. Shelton, Mr. Schultes, Professor Schultes, Dr. Perry, and what we used to have, a jack of all trades, oddly enough. His name is Jack Colbars. There's something to be said about, after all this time, that by memory, I can still name those people. And it's all because, just like what you students have today, is that you have professors that really care about you and they really want you to learn, and they take the time to see if you can, that you've mastered it, at least the best of your ability, and always encouraging you. So kind of keep that in mind. Cal Poly Pomona isn't about all that other stuff you hear about. You get a chance to display your wares annually, should you choose to do so. And at the end, hopefully, when you graduate 40 years later, you'll be like me, and you'll remember those names, which you'll hopefully come to the conclusion that this is a pretty special place. Now, the life of an engineering student, an engineer, is kind of characterized by what I call looking down. If you really think about it, you're always focused. The uniqueness about a Cal Poly Pomona student is that you generally are all working to pay for school. When I was there, it was a commuter school. It's not much better nowadays, but that's because we serve a unique need. Many of you are there. Many of you guys are there. You're probably the first person in your family to go to college. So that means that it's not that your family didn't value education, it's because they had other priorities. And if you wanted to go to college, you had to figure out to pay for yourself. So that's the uniqueness about Cal Poly Pomona, and why the faculty I have found to be extremely empathetic and frankly supportive of those type of efforts. And though, by the way, I am proud to say that 40 years ago, I actually predicted a fashion trend. When I was there, I wore a calculator on my belt. Nowadays, people wear phones on their belts. So who knew I was going to be such a fashion setter 40 years ago? But you're looking down all the time, because when you're studying, you're looking at a book, you're looking at paper. Nowadays, you look at a laptop or some sort of a screen on a smartphone and tablet. And while you're looking down, you're learning by doing. Where you're looking down there, you're looking down to your lab experiment and all this other type of stuff. And what makes looking down even more natural for engineers is because by nature, we're introverts. There's always this temptation to kind of live life vicariously through somebody else, looking through your laptop and through your tablets. And social media has definitely not made that any better. It's our comfort zone. It's just the nature of engineers. And that's why I've observed through my life that most engineers go through their careers in quiet desperation, because they look down at their work, and when they ask for their supervisors or some of their step levels, they call them now, for advice, they tend to get the same, in my opinion, wrong advice. Don't make waves, keep your nose clean, don't stick your head don't stick your head too far over the foxhole, you'll be rewarded. And what happens is that you all end up seething as you see these genetically modified empty suits climb into positions of higher management. And these guys end up by doing it by saying absurd buzz phrases such as follow the science, and then you finally realize all they did was follow the political science. Most of us, we have found that the goal is to, if we, in that introverted way that we have thinking and staying in a lane, we start going down into into a little bit of a corner by stay with the company and climb to the top, or as far as we can go. In fact, I was so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that when I graduated early after the winter quarter, back when we had quarters, I didn't even attend my graduating ceremony, which is probably why I want to be your commencement speaker someday. I'd actually like to attend the graduating ceremony. I'm told they're fun. I'd like to actually wear a cap and gown someday. But the thing about looking down and staying in your foxhole, staying in your lane, keeping your nose clean, is that you find out that when you keep doing what you're doing, the most you can expect is getting what you've got. And the consequence of it, there's some real life consequences. Uh, I'm in a position where I have to constantly take a look at what's going on with businesses. Did you know that all of the companies that comprise the original Dow Jones Industrial Average, none of them are in that group anymore? And here's some real world consequences of not making yourself more valuable, not only to you, to the more important, not to the company, but more important to yourself and to the market. If you stay in your lane and you're not looking for new opportunities to contribute, things will pass you by if you don't learn a new skill, if you don't expand your knowledge. And guess what happens? You have those empty suits that you didn't like, they end up laying off. That's just the plain consequence that I see. And I've seen that too many times. And that's why I'm in the position where I'm in, because I said, you know what, I'm not going to be a person waiting to be the next roadkill buy for an empty suit to show that he can make his numbers. What I'm going to do, and what I encourage you to, is that you need to take control. And to take control, you have to look up. You have to really come to the realization that you are responsible for realizing your potential and making a difference. And you can do that. Remember, even with everything I said earlier about the nature of an engineer, living life, having a career in quiet desperation, being an introvert. Never forget something. One of my favorite movies happens to be Pulp Fiction. Hopefully you guys have seen it. It's a lovely movie. And one of my favorite characters is a guy by the name of Winston Wolfe. If you haven't seen it, go look it up, because Winston Wolfe knocks on the door and he says, I'm Winston Wolfe. I solve problems. That's what you do. You're an engineer. You solve problems. And what's the big difference about that? Because everybody talks about scientists and researchers. What you find about scientists and researchers is they study and they admire. In fact, they study and admire the problem so much that they never want you to solve it, because they've fallen in love with it. And if you solve it, they got nothing to work on. That's why they hate us engineers, because what do? We solve and we improve. We find the root cause to solve the problem, not the symptom. By the way, that's why doctors hate engineers, because you sit there and say, okay, I know I'm sick, but I just need aspirin. I want a cure. And they kind of look at you like, well, it's not my medical knowledge. You say, I can tell. Anyway, and you solve problems. You think about how you're taught today, even in lower division, how to write a problem statement. You have given, find, solution. What you end up for learning is that through life, you can expand that to something I call gotcha: goal, objective, technical challenge, and approach. What is the goal you're trying to achieve? What are the objectives that you need to meet in order to achieve that goal? Why can't you meet those objectives today? What are the technical challenges that you have to overcome to meet those objectives to achieve that goal? And what's the approach you're going to take to overcome those technical challenges to meet the objectives to achieve that goal? It's a very logical way of thinking. And you're trained to do that. That's why you're there for 4 years. You're going to find out that you're always going to say, what do I have? What am I trying to do? What do I have? And what I'm trying to solve for. You'd be surprised how well that works throughout life. Now, the paradox of an engineering career is you get better with age. You should get better with age. You should get more experience, more knowledge. You're taking on new challenges. If you take control of your career, you will increase your relevance and opportunities and awareness. And frankly, and I've not seen it of late because I haven't been on campus for over a year. Frankly, neither of you guys, I suppose, but that should be the real inspiration for the Cal Poly Pomona Engineering Hall of Fame. And I certainly hope they follow that spirit. As I said, I got nominated, I didn't get it. And frankly, after these ramblings, you probably know why, but that's what that ought to be. I'm at the point now that I guess I should give you a little bit of a career example. While I have been working the politics and the programmer for 20 years, I was a practicing engineer once upon a time, and I wanted to make it relevant to what you guys are talking about, especially in the thermodynamics space. So let's talk about thermodynamics, which, by the way, was my first class at Cal Poly Pomona, taught by Professor Kuntz. Now, all of you should have learned, and hopefully, and please nod, and I can't see anyway, so, lie. The first law of thermodynamics, which is conservation. And what it states is that energy is always conserved. It can't be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. And you remember I was talking about Professor Kuntz. For some reason, for that guy, this never gets old. He loves asking, you can't have a bucket of energy, but what can you have a bucket of? Now, I'm sure 40 years ago you could say that, but now into this environment, I'm not sure. But that was one of his favorite jokes he would say. So you're learning all these concepts about energy conservation. And you're probably using examples like, heat exchangers and all these other things that talk more about thermal energy and showing the conservation of energy. Let me give you a little example that's real life when I was working in the auto industry. Talking about solving a problem that's not solvable. One of the biggest issues that we have in this country, and has started since we started having the automobile, was that people get into car accidents and people die and people get hurt. It's a fact of life. I'm always amazed when I go back to Southern California and I get on the freeway and everybody's going by like a NASCAR river, tip the tail going at 80 miles an hour. And you're pretty sure one guy has a blowout. And guess what happens? Sure enough, you get the big one. That's just how it happens. So, when engineers were started to be told, look, we got too many people dying. And for those, some of us are young enough to still remember to see driver's ed videos of people get horrific car crashes that were to show the real life consequences of not paying attention, not being a careful driver. You say, what's the root cause here? What can we do to prevent people from getting hurt in accidents? Well, the first thing, one of the root causes could be make drivers better. Make sure it's like in Europe where it's hard to get a driver's license and then you have to get recertified every year. When you do it, you've got to retest it, everything like that. That is perhaps one of the most socially and politically unsolvable problems in this country. In this country, even though they'll tell you driving's a privilege, we think it's a right. And frankly, having a license is like, what are the chances of me getting pulled over? Let's face it, that will never happen. We will never have good drivers in here. That's just something that is just politically unsolvable. So the next thing is that, okay, if inevitably we're going to have bad drivers, what can we do then? Well, you start studying collision physics and you start saying, well, wait a minute. The key here is to isolate people from the forces of the collision. Now, that is a pretty interesting revelation. Just so you know, it was in my lifetime. It wasn't until 1966 was it regulated to have seatbelts in the car. People don't know that. What, 1966? So from 1966 to what, 40 years later when we started having airbags everywhere? Think about that. But that notwithstanding, so that's one way of isolating things. But remember, I was talking about how energy is converted from one form to another. Okay, so you sit there, you're being held back and everything like that, but that still doesn't isolate the person from the collision forces. So that's when you get to material science and mechanical design. You actually get down to the crystalline structure of metals to say, okay, when something hits, what can I do such that that crystalline structure transforms to take out some of that energy? What are some, if you guys are racing fans like me, if you've noticed that when a car's getting a collision, you got pieces flying off all over the place. You can't do that on the freeways either, by the way. So then you'll notice, if you take a look at today's forces, you take a look at the videos, you'll see things break, you'll see things bend, you'll see things transform, you'll see everything starts moving and breaking to take away that energy and isolate the occupants that are inside that vehicle. And do you know how I know that works? Because 2 years ago, my daughter and I were driving to Washington, D.C. In my car, and we suddenly we're at a standing stop because, let's face it, if you think California people can't drive, come out to the West Coast. We're at an absolute standstill. And then suddenly we got whacked from behind by somebody traveling in excess of 70 miles an hour. You think about that. Believe it or not, after we got hit, the airbags didn't deploy. We unbuckled ourselves. We opened the doors to the car to see if the occupants behind us were hurt. But the car was totaled. That meant the car did its job. And that's why I'm talking about the skills that you're learning in these classes are very, what I call scalable skills. You can use them in other type of examples. And that, frankly, is what your upper division classes, and should you decide to go to graduate school, that's the thing, that's how it talks about thinking a little different and applying it to something that's a little out of your comfort zone, but you get more and more comfortable with those skills. You know, looking, and believe it or not, I did take and even some of the classes that you kind of wonder, why did I take it? Will this ever make a difference anywhere? Well, it turns out when I was at Cal Poly Pomona, Dr. Rathman was teaching graduate classes in statistical thermodynamics and plasma physics. Little did I know I worked for a company down the road called General Atomics. General Atomics is still the only company in the world that has a working fusion reactor, D3D. It can only work for 3 seconds because otherwise the plasma gets too hot and melts the reactor, and that's bad, by the way. But I do have to admit, when Lockheed Skunk Works and came out with it, we have a a fusion propulsion system, we're kind of going, no, you don't, because we know why you don't. You'd be surprised when you have your knowledge, how one thing you'll notice about your knowledge is that my favorite saying is that everything backs down to Newton's laws. Think about it. The sum of all the forces of a body standing still equals 0, and the sum of all the forces acting on a body in motion is equal to mass times acceleration. If you're looking at a problem and if the sum of all the forces don't equal 0, or if the sum of all the forces don't equal the mass acceleration, I don't care how much computer time you put on it, it ain't gonna work. That's why we don't have perpetual motion machines. Another other thing about looking up and applying is looking up, I would tell you now, nothing beats being there. And let me tell you why that means that there. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in the town called Lancaster. I had neighbors who spoke Spanish, or at least what I thought was their version of Spanish. I thought I knew Mexican food because I ate at Mexican restaurants in Southern California. Then I went to the East Coast and I found out all that Spanish that I knew in California, it's Puerto Rican Spanish out here. They're kind of looking at you like you can't speak Spanish. And don't even think about ordering a quesadilla out here. Back they had no idea what it is. And it was even better when 20 years ago, when I made my first trip to Spain. Don't even think about talking Mexican Spanish or Spanglish or whatever there. But the fact is that you have to, when you open up your horizons and you're actually with people, you're going to find out that, people are pretty much the same all over the world. People are nice. The governments, they stink. We all know that. We don't know why they do that. But people, some of the nicest people out there, you find when you meet them and just show a common interest and stuff like that. But make yourself more aware. There's reasons why there are things by region. It's the example I just gave you about Spanish. If you really think about it, if I stayed in Southern California, I would have thought, Mexican food's Taco Bell. Try to find a Taco Bell in Spain. Not going to happen. So, in terms of looking up and making the difference, let me tell you guys, when you guys finally graduate, all your career plans that you had, they go out the window the moment you start your real job. Okay, that's just a fact of life. And the thing is that because you're a Cal Poly Pomona engineer, you can't help but want to make things better. Is that one of my other favorite movies, Napoleon Dynamite, is that you have skills. Let's face it, you got skills. You've learned by doing. By learning by doing and making those mistakes and picking yourself up, dust yourself off and get back up there, you have resiliency. It's proven. You're going to keep learning. You're going to keep doing. You're going to keep trying. You're going to apply that knowledge and experience to problems that other generations previously thought were unsolvable. And the reason why I know that, because as I know this to be true, even that throughout my career, I've seen this happen. It's amazing what one can accomplish when one doesn't know what one can do. And the other thing is that it's amazing what you accomplish and the good you will do if you don't care who takes the credit. Now, as I understand it, things are getting back to normal. I just got my first COVID shot, and we'll see what happens when I get my second. But, I got it. And I understand this fall, you all will be going back to campus. I want you guys to kind of take some time and take stock of the lessons that you've learned over this past year when you've had to learn remotely. First is this resiliency. I don't think I've ever in my time, I was thinking about this, I actually grew up in a time when we could leave your front doors unlocked in your house, and it was that lily white picket fence of Lancaster, California. You guys have grown up at a time where you've always been at war. You guys have never known anything other than the war on terror, war on this, racial strife, and you've all dealt with it. And I can't even imagine what that does. I happen to have a 27-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter, and I kind of look at them sometimes. I wonder how that's going to impact them. But I think one of the things about parenting is I have a little bit of a hands off. Remember what I said about learn by doing? They got to figure it out themselves, and both of them turning out to be fantastic human beings because they're figuring it by themselves. You've had to learn with dealing with the fear of the unknown. This whole pandemic thing, it was frightful in the amount of ignorance that was out there, and it was frightful by the fact that but if you're an engineer, you learn how to kind of call out the facts to say what's real and what's not, at least to your understanding, and hopefully get some data points to allow you to deal with frankly the fear that was being mongered out there. The other thing is that because you're doing most of your classes online, you were learning by using all the resources that you had available to you, and that will give you a head start in life because you succeed by using all the resources that you have. Now, by the way, the last generation that went through all the same type of strife happened to be my generation, my parents, both of them. One of them was born in Texas, went to China, and had to live through World War II. He had the Japanese come in, and he finally made it back over here. He actually was told by his father that you're going to be the dishwasher you're going to inherit this wonderful Chinese restaurant in Oakland, California. Dad didn't want that. He got drafted in the Army. The Army gave him the GI Bill. And from there, he's able to go to college, actually get a degree in chemical engineering from Cal Berkeley, hired by the US government as one of the first rocket scientists to be out here at Edwards Air Force Base. And that's how he came. And that's why we're in Lancaster. My mother not only had to live through World War II, she actually through the communist takeover of China and somehow make it over here and somehow get it over to Hong Kong and somehow convince my dad to marry her. It's not hard, by the way. I saw my mother. I could see my dad fell head over heels in love with her. But this is a person that spoke zero English. And if you've ever been to Lancaster, California, and if you think it was isolated now, think about how isolated it was in the early 60s. Here's a person that knew no English, whose husband would work every day up at this remote place called the Rocket Lab, and kind of had to trust that she really was making a better life for themselves. My point about saying this is that they came what would be called the greatest generation, and I kind of believe that what you've gone through, I can't even imagine the greatness that guys will achieve, but I look forward to being part of that. By the way, I understand that if you guys were not able to get some sort of semblance of an in-person graduation, that your diplomas would have been mailed to all of you in a large plain brown envelope, and to prevent porch pirates, they were going to have been marked diploma from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, because we know nobody wants a degree from there. Anyway, a couple of last words before I open it up for some questions. I want you guys to remember that on top of everything, despite everything you've been seeing, despite all the strife that we've had over the past, and certainly we've had over the past few years, we are all Americans and we live in America. One of my favorite places to visit continues to be the National Archives, because there is a document in there, the original, called the Declaration of Independence. And it has something in there that makes us unique within the world. We're the one country that was founded on the basis of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're the only country in the world that wants you to be happy. Now, to be happy and to look up, you've got to be comfortable with yourself. And from experience, I can say that you've achieved that level of comfort if you practice daily this John Philip Sousa quote: "Dance as if nobody is watching. Love as though you've never been hurt. Sing as though no one can hear you. And live as though heaven is on earth." By the way, guys, if you like this, please tell the dean. Maybe someday when you look up, I'll be your commencement speaker, and I'll finally get to attend that Cal Poly Pomona College of Engineering commencement ceremony. So with that, I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to ask if there's any questions. But thank you so very much for your time. I do appreciate it, guys.
Great. Thank you very much, James. So we certainly have time for questions. Let's just start with faculty first. Any questions for James? I think Paul has a question.
Please.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out to give this talk. I can see there's dozens and dozens of students here, and I know how hard it is to give this kind of talk when you don't get that kind of feedback, the laughter and the applause and all that. So I really appreciate it. I think what might be helpful for the students would be to know what are some of the times that you've actually experienced a significant setback or failure in your life, and what was your mentality at that time, and how did you overcome that?
I face setbacks daily. I work in Washington, D.C. I mean, it hurts the first time. It hurts the first time that you don't get what you think you're going to get. And one of the biggest setbacks I ever had was, here I am with this wonderful career, and I was convinced by my idol, Bob Lutz, who was at the time the chairman of Chrysler, to leave the cocoon of federal government and go out to private industry. And I'm going, I don't care how much the Navy's paying you, I'll triple your pay. And I went into a commercial company and I failed miserably. And I failed miserably because when Bob left, and I was a C-suite executive, when Bob left, funny thing about CEOs, they don't have very much time to make their own mark in the world. So they want their own team. So right after we got the new CEO, he says, I love you guys, but I need to bring in my own team. Here's your golden parachute. So for the first time since I was 15 years old, I wasn't working. There's a lot of ways you can take that. You could, you start thinking to yourself, what can you really do? And especially when you've been in government like me, you're pushing paper, making policy and stuff like that. That's not a very scalable skill to the outside. But you have to get back to what I was thinking earlier. What is your core? Who are you? What can you do? What's your skills? And I think I was able to overcome that. I think that was a very, very that was a really exhilarating moment for me, because I'll tell you right now, there's nothing. I had a family at the time. I just had moved us to Pennsylvania, and we were making all sorts of plans based on this wonderful salary I was getting. But there's really nothing more exhilarating, and nothing gives you a better sense of freedom when you have your worst fears realized. Because now suddenly, maybe that's somebody from a greater force telling you, you got to stop and figure out what you really want to do with your life. With that, I can tell you now, I never thought I'd be working for Silicon Valley company. That's why I'm a mechanical engineer. I never thought I would be working to try to use those skills and everything that I've learned to really make a difference onto the country. All this stuff that you're hearing about, semiconductors and all this other type of bringing the supply chain back to the US. I'm right in the middle of it. Life will work yourself out, and you have to get comfortable with yourself. And that's the best advice I can give you. And it's not easy. There are going to be some times you're going to say, what am I doing here? But every now and then there's that one word that we engineers don't like to hear very much, but you have to have, and that's called faith. Believe in yourself. Good things will happen when you do. Next question, please.
Great. We have 4 students with questions, so I'm going to start. Yes, let's start with Tyler.
Hi, first off, thank you for your speech. It was awesome. You had mentioned a couple times, just mentioned graduate school, and I was wondering if you could give some insight on your thoughts of graduate school after undergraduate or later into career or anything of that nature.
I think to me, it depends. You have to ask yourself what type of person you are. When I got out of, I remember I was telling you about I was going to make a difference, so I'm going to get out to the workforce. And at that time was a special time because that's when President Reagan was announcing the Strategic Defense Initiative, and we were going to put up a shield to protect us from. So I went in there. But I also thought, I probably should get a graduate degree also because I kind of want to move up in life. The interesting part about it is that my first attempt at graduate school was at University of Washington, and I was going to get a master's degree in aerospace engineering from my graduate advisor, going to be Gordon Oates. And he died in his sleep. So I kind of felt, well, there's a sign. So I moved from Seattle back to Southern California and to work at the rocket lab. And then again, they said, well, have you thought about a graduate degree? So I took a little different approach. I have a master's degree in systems engineering from the University of Southern California, because I said, you know what, why not do that? I think there's good signs for both. The nice thing about it is if you go to graduate school right after you get your undergraduate, you're used to being a poor student, so you can't lust after everything else that your friends have because, well, that's just the life of a student. So you frankly don't mind living on ramen for, 3 meals a day. But there's also things about saying, when I go back to when I get a little perspective, now when I go to grad school, I know what I really want to pursue. Graduate school, in my mind, it's just my perspective. It's not right for it should be your passion, because now this time you really are making a choice. I can either be making money or I could be going to school. So you have to do that for yourself. It's a personal choice, and I hope you appreciated that non-answer. But that's the best one I can give. So,
thank you. That was insightful.
Certainly.
Great, Frederick.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for coming out and giving us a speech. It was a really good speech. Now, you've been through a lot in your engineering career. You've been around a lot, not just in engineering. I was wondering if you could give us like just one key takeaway that you've had throughout all of your time, what it would be. Just like a short snippet of one thing that you've probably stuck to the most and has gotten you the farthest.
Yeah, I think a lot of times is that remember I was telling you about remember who you are. And I talk about being Americans. We Americans are really good at on making things work. We just kind of get that as, okay, here's a problem, I'm going to solve it. Something that I've learned through time is perspective. Sometimes when you solve something for the short term, you've actually made things worse for the long term. And trust me, I'm in Washington, D.C. I see this on a daily basis. If you have the opportunity, and that's why I talk about, look at the symptom. They look at the root cause of the disease, not the symptom. What is causing all this other type of stuff? A lot of times it's just like, remember that when you're solving a problem, try to solve find the root cause and solve that. But also understand that root cause will change. Just because you solve the problem, don't think you've solved it for the rest of that for eternity. Those problems tend to come back because that root cause tends to change a little bit. That's the other thing I've sort of noticed also. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, James. Nevada, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you again for the speech here. I just wanted to ask, I know you had mentioned seeing like the Rose float and whatnot. Were you involved with anything specific on campus besides just your schoolwork?
Yes, I was very active in the, I was in the engineering clubs. I was at the Society of Automotive Engineers, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And when they used to call it Polyview, the annual Cal Poly Pomona open house, I was asked by a couple of engineering professors in the mechanical engineering department to put together displays for Polyview. So what I decided to do because frankly, we mechanical engineers hated the civil engineers, let's face it. And so they would always have these I don't know if they still do this. They would do these surveying demonstrations. You know, you wear the vest, you hold sticks, and you wave to each other. Oddly enough, you know, you would think those civil engineers would be friendly because they're waving to each other all the time, but frankly, they're not. But so what I decided to do, and that's kind of when I started learning my entrepreneurial skills, I would go out to companies and say, you know, I want to demonstrate what is mechanical engineering in the real world. And frankly, that's how I started getting my connections into the auto industry, because the auto companies gladly sent some stuff to me for that. The oil and gas industries gladly sent some stuff in that also. So yeah, it was really, if you're thinking about it, if your parents are going to take the time to come and see what you're doing, you kind of want to do more than just the horsey ducky and here's an equation. You want to say, I'm learning this because this is what I'm going to be able to do. So that's in addition to the rose flow. So I hope that helps.
Great.
Definitely. Thank you.
So Derek.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful speech. And I have a question about just starting the career in general. I know for myself as well, and I feel like other students, when they first get that initial offer or trying to get that offer, for me right now, my internship has a pathway to a full-time position after graduation. And in your opinion, what is the best way to bring up like that talk for like kind of negotiating a contract or salary or something like that? Because I feel like a lot of people don't know how to bring that up.
Well, a couple of things, you know, you're just not selling. The engineers are in such demand, and this is something that I find frustrating with especially people just getting their undergraduate degrees. You're just not selling yourself to them. They got to sell themselves to you. So after a while, we talk about. In fact, I was on this with the. I was a panel member on a National Academy study on why can't we get more scientists and engineers and mathematicians to work for the Department of Defense. And it was chaired by a good friend of mine, Norm Augustine. When you have a chance, go look at his book called Augustine's Laws. Fascinating book. In fact, I lovingly steal from it all the time, and I promote it because Norm's even though he's was the former chairman of Lockheed Martin. I joke with him. He's a retiree now, living on a fixed income. So any new books I can sell on his behalf, I'm sure will help. But you know, I asked the question to the panel, who there were industry members. I said, you know what? How many of us had our graduate schools paid for by our companies, our organizations? So we all raised our hands. I said, you guys working with these big aerospace companies, how many of you pay for that now? Well, you know, golly, it's like, well, what do you think is the issue? These kids, they want a career, they want a path. They don't want to read. I hope you guys still read this comic. They don't want to be like Dilbert, stuck in a cubicle doing the same thing every day. You know, they want to go on and move on to other things. And the other thing that you have to remember when you negotiate your first one, usually it's important to get the first one, because the chances of you staying at that same job for your career, not zero, but pretty darn close. And sometimes it's by choice. Or sometimes it's because something happens that the company gets purchased or goes out of business or something like that. Remember, you're a valuable asset. That doesn't mean be arrogant. Be respectful. Understand that. But just remember, you're not going to be at that first job for very long. So if it's just a matter of getting a job to see what it's like, go take a look at the line edge right now in engineering. There's all over the place. So just sort of keep that in mind. Don't be greedy. Be respectful. Kind of stay in your lanes. I mean, and I shouldn't say stay in your lanes, but understand where you are. That being said, it's important to get that first step, and then once you get in, start negotiating from there.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So let's continue with Gary. Gary.
Thank you so much for your speech. My question is, when we start in the workforce as junior engineers, what is your advice to be impactful with our contributions at the company that we're at?
I think it's try to understand what you're doing and how that makes an impact to the company. I mean, that's number one. And especially because you're Cal Poly Pomona engineers, show that you are immediately productive. You know, one thing that I still remember when I first was first got a job at the Boeing Company, and I was doing some lab work, and I was writing reports, lab reports. And my supervisor says, this is fantastic. And never saw this before. By the way, it was because of Professor Noreen, who was teaching at Cal Poly Pomona at the time that I had my job at Boeing. Which was odd because they usually hired from MIT. So here I am, Cal Poly Pomona, first guy from all these MIT grads, and here comes this clown from Cal Poly Pomona. And I'm in there just immediately. I'm just doing exactly what I was taught in school. And guess what I found? I was miles ahead in terms of being able to contribute to that company, because they said, well, I don't have to watch this guy. I know if I give him an assignment, I know that he'll get it done. So remember who you are. You're a Cal Poly Pomona engineer. And the second thing, learn about your company. Learn about what you could do. If you start showing more of an interest, rather that introverted, narrow, stay in your lane type company, that will help quite a bit.
Great. So we have about 10 minutes and a few more questions still.
Great.
Let's
I can stay a little longer if you'd like, if that's okay. But
oh,
it's up to you.
beautiful. Fantastic. So William, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, you'd mentioned that it's important to continue to, or that you're going to continue to grow as an engineer throughout your career. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, how much did you feel that you grew after graduating? And then also for that growth, did you feel like that was intentional? Let's say continuing to read, higher level literature, or was just simply from the experience that it just comes with time?
Well, when you look up and get to know people, and suddenly you do things, you suddenly finding that those that you were idolized or admired are suddenly peers. And sometimes after a while, they start taking a look at what you're doing. I learned a lot. I learn a lot every day. I'm in a field that I have, it's funny. They gave you that advice about, most people don't stay at the same company since they after they earned their undergraduate degree. Both my brothers did, and both of them were electrical engineers. And to this day, they wonder why I'm an executive in a Silicon Valley company while they've done very well, by the way, while they're project engineers or something like that. Well, a lot of it is because you start applying your skills, like what I used that example earlier about the energy management and auto collisions, in different ways. I know what my skills are. I said earlier about that time when I was at that down point and figured out what can you really do. So that's what you should take a lot of time doing. And the only way you can figure that out is by always stretching. It's like what we say in the, if you haven't figured out yet, I'm a car enthusiast. You sit there and you push limits of a car, and sometimes it's going to slip and you're going to spin and stuff like that. And you go, well, that was interesting. So next time I do it, I'll know how that feels, and I know how much further I can really push it. You don't stretch, and it's just like if you guys are, and I try, you can't see it. I like to think I can that I'm in fairly good shape because I do go to the gym all the time. But when you exercise, you're actually kind of breaking down your muscle, and it's rebuilding, and it's rebuilding even stronger. That's the same way in terms of your knowledge base in your career. You got to stretch and you got to break a few things. You're going to end up pissing off people by doing it. But you know what? At the end of the day, you don't care, because the only person who's responsible for your success is you. So sometimes when you take a risk, it doesn't pay off. Hopefully you've learned something from it, because frankly, as a friend of mine, my mentor at the Pentagon once said, you've never failed unless you've never truly failed. If you've learned something from an experience, even if it's a failure, you really haven't failed. I hope that helps.
That's very insightful. So let's continue with Sarab.
Yes, thank you, Professor. Thank you for that amazing speech. Now I know why, scientists kind of hate engineers. But my question for you, sir, is that did you ever feel pressure to get a job right away when you graduated from college? And if you did, how did you handle that pressure? Because I feel personally, since I'm very close to my family, I know how hard they work every day, and me getting a job in engineering would, like, solve all that problems and, like, put them at ease. So I'm starting to feel that pressure myself. So, but if you did, how did you handle that pressure?
Well, I was lucky in that I had a student engineering job by the time and the student engineering job I had guaranteed me a full-time job once I graduated, which I didn't take. I took another job. But you really have to put it out there. As I said, are you a U.S. citizen?
Yes, sir, I am.
Well, go take a look at any aerospace company in Southern California, because they're desperately trying to hire U.S. citizen engineers in positions right now. I think Raytheon has combined between Raytheon, Northrop, and Boeing, there's over 10,000 open engineering recs. You should not have an issue getting a job.
So James, actually along this question, I have a question for you. How
Sure.
do you think the pandemic is going to affect the expectations from our students in the immediate next couple of years?
Well, I think that some people, it's really hard to say. I think that business moves on. The funny thing about business is that, yeah, boy, all this news about the pandemic is as fine as that, is devastating, and yeah, we're interested. But take a look at right now, if you follow the business world, such as I have to, it's earnings season. Everybody's reporting their numbers right now. So and if you want your stock to go up, you not only have to meet the analyst expectations, you got to beat it. So at the end of the day, if the analysts don't care, the company doesn't care. They have to move on. So they have to always be refreshing and hiring stuff like that. So I think frankly, I think there's even more pressure right now on the company to find a talented workforce. And especially if the students have been able to show an aptitude of teaching themselves, which they've had to, because I said, frankly, it was interesting how overnight last March, every single college became University of Phoenix. But you have to show that. So just as, again, the pressure's on them too. Just keep that in mind. And I think that that's kind of the only expectations that we can say is that, has this shown, and what have their grades been during this time, and have they shown that they really are the go-getters? And if they're Cal Poly Pomona engineers, that should not be a problem.
Beautiful. Jake, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, thank you. Hi, James. Thank you for the presentation. It's really helpful
Of
to
course.
understand how the engineers work in the real world. I have a question regarding, since I was a transfer student months before COVID hit, I felt like I haven't gotten the Cal Poly engineering experience. So I was wondering, right at home, how would you sell yourself to companies? Like, what skills, like your insight on what should you develop in order to sell yourself to companies?
Well, I think a lot of it is what's unique about Cal Poly Pomona in the undergraduate ranks is they encourage you to do projects. So I would sell yourself on what type of project that you do, and if it was a team project, what role you played. I talked about the engineering clubs. We were very active in doing team projects all the time. I think that's because being engineers, we were very social. And let's face it, the only people you could socialize with were other engineers. But still, the fact of the matter is that in the real world, in the real engineering workforce, that's what you do. I would sell your team building skills. I would sell one of the things that I think that is invaluable that people, engineers don't, that tend to discount, is learn your communication skills. You have no idea how engineers can't communicate. And if they come across it, here's a guy who's well-spoken, can write a complete sentence, and it's in English that we can understand, that helps out very well also. So sell the complete package. You've got skills, as I said. Everybody's gone to all these classes that you've taken, but what have you done outside of that? Are you getting involved? Do that. That's usually the difference maker. I hope that helps.
It does. But unfortunately, because of COVID and everyone's separated, I feel like my team collaborations aren't that effective. So I was wondering, would personal projects be helpful as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's what I did. Here's what I did, and this is why I was able to do this. Here's, just like that, because they're going to ask you questions about those type of things.
All
Show
right,
some, show your project that shows some initiative. That never hurts. Believe me. That can
all right,
only
thank you so much.
certainly.
Great. So I think we have also a question from Brianna.
Okay.
Hi. So, in terms of taking on future leadership positions in the industry, what soft skills do you think is most important that we as college students should practice right now so that we can be prepared for that management role in the future?
I remember I was telling you earlier about the communication skills.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a real life story. I have a friend of mine. This is after I joined the company for a little while, and I got it. I was introduced to a new colleague. He actually had come back to Cadence after some time at Apple. In fact, he was at Apple when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, fired the entire computer design group, and he fired my new colleague, to stand it up. And he was back. He was now he'd done his time at Apple. I guess he was tired of making $bazillion, so he came back to Cadence. So at that same time, there was this documentary that came out at the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. And I was watching it, and I was noticing every executive they interviewed had the word former in front of it. So I finally asked my buddy, I said, every one of the iPhone team had the word former in front of it. Is it because of burnout? Or is it because they made a lot of money and they say that's it, or they're moved on to another position? He said it was burnout. I said, what do you mean? And he says, you have no idea how hard a guy Steve Jobs was. I said, okay, explain. He says, literally, if you got on an elevator with Steve Jobs and you didn't have an elevator pitch to pitch a new product, you were fired by the time that elevator stopped. And he told me a story about how he was at the Apple cafeteria and Jobs was behind him, and Jobs was right down there breathing down the guy's neck, and he apparently wasn't moving fast enough to put his change back in his pocket. Jobs pushed him out of the way. If you're going to make lots of money, which we all want to, and you're going to be working in an innovative, thriving industry, that's the pace you work at. I cannot even tell you. I mean, when I land in San Jose and I go to the headquarters, you just feel it. Everybody's running at a different pace. But it's not like in Washington, D.C., where everybody's running in front of a television camera. Here, they're running at a different pace to get a product out. So how do you get ahead in that type of environment? It gets to be communication skills. Always have that. You always have that idea. You're always, even though we hate communicating, we think that's one of the softer skills, you're always selling yourself. You communicate to influence. That's what you're trying to do. So learn that, use your communication skills. And in fact, that's one of the unique things I liked about Cal Poly Pomona. One of the engineering, we used to have to take engineering writing because you had to write a proposal. Remember I was telling you about writing written communications? To this day, even though my job does not require it, I file a weekly activity report with my supervisors. And every week they could say, here's what he said, here's what he did. It's in summary form. Here's more details. Here's what he says he's going to do next week. I've been with this company now for 5 years. They have 5 years worth of activity reports where they can say, he said he was going to do this. He did it. Here's what happened. Here's stuff like that. Those are the type of softer skills. Have the integrity, show yourself accountability, but learn to communicate. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Perfect. Beautiful. I see Derek's hand is up. Derek, do you have a follow-on question, or it's just an accident? Okay.
Oh, sorry, it was just an accident. I was replying to someone in the
No
chat.
worries.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
And to the answer to somebody who asked, can they nominate me to be your 2022 speaker? The answer is yes, please do. I wouldn't mind coming back.
There you go. We'll definitely follow on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, James. It was a great pleasure to have you. I think this event was very well received by our students and the faculty, and we really appreciate the time that you spent with us.
Wonderful. Good luck to you all. Congratulations for those of you who are going to be graduating, and I'm looking for you all to continue. One thing to remember, you represent Cal Poly Pomona the moment you graduate with that degree. you will find out there's a reason why alums like me don't want anybody else to know about Cal Poly Pomona, because when it comes time to hiring new employees that make a difference, we want to make sure that we've got a ready pool that we can dip into. So good luck to you all. I hope to see you. And maybe in 2022, I'll be wearing a cap and gown talking to you all. So thank you very much, everybody. You have a great rest of the day.
There you go.
I still have a question.
Oh, please. Yes.
I'm sorry. I keep trying the hand raise function, but it seems to not be working so well. You mentioned, and I assume it was for the sake of whim, that you used to set the trend of carrying a calculator on your belt. And trying to imagine what the calculators were like back in 1982 or 83. And we have our fancy scientific calculators these days, but it got me to thinking how you've navigated the technological changes over the course of your 37 or 40 years, whichever you prefer. Thinking the transitions to MATLAB, to SolidWorks from more analog varieties. How has that been for you?
Well, I mean, it really, again, take a look at the look up one day what a TI-58C calculator looked like, and then look up what an HP 41CV calculator looked like. And those are the calculators we walked around with on campus, proudly showing it off, I might add. Technology is a funny thing. If you do it right, it should be transparent and a very easy transition to the consumer. One of the things that I find fascinating about my job, talking to the Department of Defense about using commercial electronics design best practices in designing defense equipment, is that they all say, you can't do that. And I hold up and says, yeah, you can. You take it for granted nowadays. How many of you would believe that you now have refrigerators that can scan your contents, figure out what your diet is, what's inside your refrigerator, and suggest recipes? Because that's what it is nowadays. Nowadays, car companies brag about how connected you are. When you walk into your car, a new car, everything's already connected. My friends at BMW recently sent me a new app that I can look at any one of the cars I own that if they're BMWs and tell you exactly where it's parked, how much gas it has in it, what's the state of charge, everything along those lines. I think there's such thing as technology overload. I will tell you right now, my 91-year-old father, frankly, can't stand it. Keep in mind, this is the same guy who was one of this country's leading rocket scientists. I guess when you work with stuff that goes boom, you kind of want it to just kind of work once, and you want to be stable. But you find a market for everything, and if it's going to make your life, if it's going to give you the ability to do truly great things and make crazy great products, you learn to accept it and you learn to adopt. So that's kind of. But by the way, judging by that bicycle, I can kind of see why you had a hard time raising your hand on Zoom. But oh well. I hope that helps. I'm sorry.
Great.
It does. Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other last minute questions? All right. We appreciate your time again, James. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Great. Hope to see you guys again soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right.